Welcome back, kids. Are you ready for our last week of Advent together? Let's go through it all, in case you missed it, or just to be sure that you remember everything, because this is important. Advent means, that's right, it means the coming. There are two comings. Jesus came the first time and was born in Bethlehem, and Jesus is coming again to make all things right and to conquer his enemy for good. So Advent is a really important time in the life of a believer. It's the time that we remember God keeping his promises that first Advent season, and we practice getting ready for Jesus to come again. That's why we talk about those 3 W words during Advent. Do you remember what they are? That's right, they're waiting, watching, and worshiping. We learn from all of the characters that God chose to be a part of that first Advent how to wait, how to keep our eyes open watching, and how to respond with worship. So all of these characters teach us how to be ready for this second coming. So let's do a quick review of these characters that we have met so far. I know there's a lot of them. We started with the prophets. And remember, prophets were people who spoke for God. They gave God's words, God's messages to the people. It's kind of like, you know, how you've got a megaphone and you speak into a megaphone and it makes your voice loud enough for everybody else to hear. The prophets were kind of like that megaphone, taking God's voice to the people. And they gave lots of messages. Some of the messages the prophets gave were about the coming Messiah. And these were like little clues for everybody who was waiting and watching, because the prophecies told everybody where the Messiah was going to be born, what family line he was going to come from, what he was going to be like, what his life was going to be like, what people were going to call him. These were God's promises spoken to his people so that they could be watching and wouldn't miss out when he kept his promise of bringing the Messiah. So we met the prophets. After we met the prophets, we met the angels. The angels are also God's messengers. We talked about how angels are warriors. They fight God's enemy on our behalf. We talked about how they're worshipers. They taught those shepherds really what it looks like to worship. And these angels bring messages. They gave messages to Mary and to Joseph, and they gave messages to the shepherds to give them the good news. Then we met the shepherds. And the shepherds, remember, were the nobodies. They were the guys living out in the fields, outside of town, that nobody wanted to be around, nobody wanted to hang out with. They probably weren't very educated. I mean, they lived in the fields. They were dirty and smelly, and they weren't the guys that you thought would get the best news of the world first. And yet they were the first ones to receive the news that the Messiah had been born, that he was here, and he was here for them. And when I look at these candles that I'm lighting, with each candle that I light, it actually brings a little more light. And Jesus is the light of the world. And so as each of these characters came along into the story, they brought a little more light with all of their news until Jesus could come be the light. And then last week, a couple of really important things happened. First of all, Jesus was born, right? God kept his promise. The Messiah came. He was born in Bethlehem, just like the prophecy said. He was born to the family line of King David, just like the prophecy said. So we see God keeping his promises. So this middle candle actually kind of represents a few other characters because I don't have enough candles here. But we see that Jesus is born, he brings light into the world. And then not too long after Jesus was born, he met Simeon and Anna, two people who literally had spent their whole lives waiting and watching for Jesus. And there they were in the temple that day that Mary and Joseph brought their newborn baby in for dedication. And because they had been faithfully waiting, and because their eyes were always open to see him when he showed up, they recognized this baby as the Messiah, and they worshiped him. Well, we've got one more set of characters here that we are going to talk about today, and that's our last candle, and that is the wise men. So light the wise men candle. Look at all this light that we have brought into the room. That's what Jesus does. He brings light. So we've got the wise men here, and who exactly were the wise men? Well, the wise men, in a lot of ways, might seem like the total opposites of the shepherds. The wise men were really wealthy. They were very well educated. These ones probably were astronomers. They studied the skies. And wise men, sometimes I think we think that maybe they just kind of showed up in this part of the Bible, but actually there are wise men all the way throughout the Old Testament. We are introduced to wise men in the book of Numbers, all the way back towards the beginning of the Bible. And we are introduced to wise men again in the book of Daniel, which is where I want to start today. So wise men sometimes were referred to as astronomers or magicians or sorcerers, but typically they were advisors to the king. They knew the most kind of about the world around them and things like that. They were very smart and very well educated, and the kings would bring them in to give them advice. Well, in Daniel's time, I don't know if you remember this, but during Daniel's time, God's people, the Israelites, had been exiled from Israel. They had all been taken out of their home country, sent other places to live, and Daniel ended up in the east in a city called Babylon. Well, Daniel, through the power of the Holy Spirit, he was able to interpret some of the king's dreams. And so the king of Babylon, 1,000 years before Jesus came, the king of Babylon put Daniel in charge of all of his wise men. And scholars today believe that the reason these wise men, all these years later, knew about this Messiah and this star was because Daniel had taught them the prophecies of the one true God. And there was a prophecy in the book of Numbers about a star that would appear, and it was called his star. It was a prophecy about a star revealing that the Messiah had come. So how cool is it that, like so many years before the Messiah came, God let Daniel and his people experience this really, really hard time and placed Daniel in the east so that all those years later, these wise men would know to be waiting and watching for that star to appear. How cool is that, you guys? So cool. It's like all these puzzle pieces like being put together into this puzzle, and you're like, oh my gosh, look how God like sets everything in motion, and look how God makes his promises, and look how God always keeps his promises. It's so exciting. So these wise men have been waiting, and they've been watching, their eyes in the sky, studying the stars, waiting for the star of the promised Messiah, when lo and behold, it shows up, and they know what it means. And so these wise men leave everything, their homes, their families, and they head out on a journey. They don't know how long they're going to be gone. They don't know exactly what they're going to find, but they know that they're in search of a promised king, and they want to worship that king. So there's actually some similarities between these nobody shepherds and these somebody wise men. The shepherds left everything to go worship the king as well, just like the wise men did. The shepherds were the nobodies who got the first news, but they were the Jewish nobodies, God's people nobodies. The wise men were the very first Gentiles to get the news. And a Gentile is anybody that's not Jewish. So I'm a Gentile. Probably most of you are Gentiles as well. And it was this proof that when Jesus said he is coming for everybody, and when the angel said to the shepherds, guess what? This is good news for everyone. That included not just the nobody shepherds, but it included the Gentiles, everybody who wasn't already one of God's people. That Jesus came for all of us. What an incredible story. And so the wise men take this journey, and they journey, scholars believe, anywhere from like 6 months up to even 2 years. They looked for Jesus. They looked for the promised Messiah. They were so patient along their journey, and their journey was not easy. You try traveling up to 2 years on a camel in the desert. These men who were used to comfort and used to the good things in life, and they traveled on a camel, walking and riding, feeling like it was worth the journey. So if you think about it, gosh, if it took them up to 2 years, it probably took them close to that amount of time to get back as well. So it's possible that they were away from their homes and families for years. Can you imagine what that ride back to their homes was like for them? I want you to close your eyes for just a minute. And I want you to imagine yourself, you have been walking for so long. Your feet are tired. You're dirty. Probably hungry. And you come across this little boy. And that's what the journey has been all about. Open your eyes. How would you respond? I'm really tired. Can I take a nap first? I don't know. But we know that the Bible says these wise men, their response to finding this king finally was to bow down and worship him. Love that. They bowed down and they worshiped him. So these wise men also teach us an awful lot about waiting, about watching, and about worshiping. So guys, that's it for Advent. We have waited together, we've watched together, and Jesus has come and we have worshiped together. Let's not forget that Advent does not end today. Advent is every day of our lives. We're waiting patiently for Jesus to come again. Are we keeping our eyes open? Where is God at work in the world? What is he doing? How can I be a part of it? And when I see God at work all the time, do I respond with worship? Am I kind to my brother and sister? Do I obey my mom and dad? Do I forgive those who hurt me? Do I take care of those who need taken care of? Am I responding in worship? Am I talking to God, praying, singing, bowing down? Let's worship together. I hope you enjoyed our time of Advent together. Let's not forget that we're still in this together as we wait for Jesus to come again. Have a super, super great week, and we will see you again next time.